Now, welcome to another week of 120 Dublin Stories with Santa Rita and the Little Museum of Dublin. Now, our guest this evening is Darina Gallagher, the director of the James Joyce Centre. Darina, thank you so much for being here.
Oh, you're so welcome. Can you hear me okay? Is everything working?
Crystal clear, I can hear you and I can see you, so all is well in the world. Well, what a turn of phrase. But thank you so much for being here. I have loads of questions, so I'm going to just jump in and ask you the first one. So just kind of, I'd love you just to set the scene for us a little bit and just tell me a little bit about the founding of the Joyce Centre and maybe the mission of it as an organisation.
Well, it is a really fascinating foundation. The origins of the centre go back to the late 1970s and early 80s, when really maybe it's similar to a point that we're at now in thinking about tearing down buildings in Dublin and what we want to preserve in our city and what kind of a city space do we want, because of course I wasn't around in the late 1970s, early 80s, but of course people like David Norris, this huge campaigner on so many issues, really was fundamental in preserving North Great Georgia Street. The city, Georgian Dublin, was being demolished at that time, and a group of campaigners, as we've heard about those stories and the history of preserving Georgian Dublin, managed to save a building on North Great Georgia Street. As at the bottom of North Great Georgia Street was being demolished, they managed to stop the rest of the demolition of the street from tenements that really they were, and in very poor condition, but almost using a Joyce Centre and a literary centre for Dublin as a way of saying, stop, we need to think about what we're doing. So James Joyce was I suppose, partly through to from David Norris's own passion, his extraordinary passion for James Joyce, and saying Dublin didn't have a centre for this literary genius. Dublin, I think still has had for the decades following that, a kind of a complicated relationship with James Joyce. But here was a moment in time to say, we have to be brave. We may not understand his work, and we may find it a bit offensive because it's 1970s Ireland. But we have to acknowledge that the world is looking at this incredible writer and the gifts that he has given in the world to the world. So then from 1982, which was the centenary of Joyce's birth, Dublin City Council gave the James Joyce Cultural Centre this building, and restoration work began. And it took another really about 14 years, I think, till about 1996 for that work to be done. And European funding and incredible investment by the city, and of course a place to store the door of number 7 Eccles Street, which is housed in the James Joyce Centre, which of course was another demolition of Georgian buildings on Eccles Street, in the home of Leopold and Molly Bloom in Ulysses. Yeah, I mean, I think its history is a history of preservation and acknowledging culture in the city, and I think that's really interesting. I love telling people this about this incredible legacy of preserving
It,
our,
it
our, our
is
city's culture.
it is incredible, and I think when you're talking about how Joyce's work and identity and is kind of playing a part in saving the architectural fabric of the city. It really, for a man who wrote so detailed such detailed descriptions about the city, it's something quite poignant about that. And
Especially in where its location in the North Inner City, sometimes when I'm giving tours as well, and the poor Dublin North Inner City, it still has this legacy of kind of poverty and dysfunction and chaotic lives. And of course, that's what Joyce landed into at age 11 from this privileged background in Bray and Blackrock. And as the family declined into poverty, they landed in Hardwick Street and then moved 14 times, I think, around the North Inner City. And what he's describing in his books, particularly Portrait of the Artist, and then in Dubliners, and these characters and these lives and situations. I mean, it's just surrounds you in these, from Parnell Street up to Mountjoy Square, and of course on to Glasnevin Cemetery in Phibsborough, and so it's really amazing. Its situation too.
Because he does create a snapshot of the Dublin
Mm.
of that moment, and I'm always curious, and in terms of how you engage with academics, guests into the center, the education, the proficient reader, the person who's coming to Joyce for the first time, the way you engage with, I guess, any and every reader. I'm One thing that you mentioned to me earlier this week when we caught up in advance of this, is that one of the things you've spent some time on in the last couple of months is looking at the theme of children,
Yeah.
Joyce's work. And I kind of thought that was not necessarily an obvious place to start. So therefore, I would, I guess my question is not really too specific. Just tell me.
Yeah, I think one of, and I've been only director for the last 18 months or so, since just before lockdown, but I've been working with the Joyce Centre for about 10 years. And I've really kind of recognized that one of the goals was really to look to new audiences to Joyce, as you talked about, kind of people who have no idea, new readers. And I think particularly for a younger audience, he seems very challenging and aloof, and people have seen this statue of the man with the glasses, the stick, and so they've seen pictures on posters and they don't really know what that is. And I've worked in through Joyce's text and performance, trying to make that accessible. And particularly, I thought, if I can get through to children, that they know about this writer or this name, but how do we make some of his work even a little bit accessible and interesting? So um, I I've been working on a show for children that takes the child characters in Ulysses in particular. I've kind of looked at other work, of course, especially Dubliners. A lot of the early short stories in that collection are about childhood. But in Ulysses, he gives us such a complete picture of the city, that he doesn't leave anything out. So, of course, children are part of it. And the more I scrape away or pull at a thread, the more I realize he's telling us so much. But of course, the book is so dense; they're often overlooked. These incredible children's stories. So of course, there's Leopold and Molly Bloom's own children, Millie, who on the 16th of June, he gets a letter from her and she started work already in Mullingar. So, and the day before was her 15th birthday. So at 14, she went to work in a photography shop, which I thought was kind of cool that she was embracing new technology. And she was a kind of cool 14-year-old going off to I kind of see her, doing selfies and anyway, but that may be for another show. And then their other child, Rudy, died at only 11 days old. So we get this straight away we get this relationship in chaos, partly because their one child has gone. She's left the family home, and then the memory of this little baby who died is still with them. So, I mean, that's just one little tiny bit of the story. And then we've children at school. Stephen Dedalus, the other major character in Ulysses, is teaching at a boys' school to privileged children out in Dalkey, and he's a bored teacher and he's planning his drinking for the rest of the day. And the children are eating fig rolls while trying to learn Greek, and it's really fun. And then we've another character that I love, and especially with Kelly Harrington just winning the well, it's either silver or gold, isn't it? Woohoo, go Kelly! But there's a funeral in Ulysses, Paddy Dignam's funeral, and of course he has children, and the, his one of his children attends the funeral, and then we meet him just for a moment walking along Wicklow Street in Dublin after the funeral, and he's been sent out to get messages. And they were all crying in the parlor, and it was too bloom and dull sitting in the parlor, and he sees a poster of two boxers, and he imagines going to see Moiler Keogh box against Sergeant Major Bennett, the Portobello Bruiser, and he's all excited about this, and this is a wonderful distraction from the funeral. And he looks at the poster, and he's missed it. It was on a few weeks ago, and then he meets schoolboys, and he has to think about the funeral again. Do they know that my father is dead yet? Have they seen the notice in the newspaper? He's landed back from this wonderful boxing match he was about to see. And then Stephen's sisters, who Joyce tells us about childhood poverty, and of course this is quite autobiographical. Joyce's own sisters would have really had to struggle to get money from his father. They lived up in St. Peter's Road in Phibsborough, and James Joyce, the oldest son, the golden child, got everything. He went to university, got the good Belvedere education. But the sisters, after his mother died in 1902, they really had to take over the household duties and literally beg for money, for food, and go to the nuns to try and really keep the house going. The other nine children, or eight children at that stage, um, that another brother had died at age 14, but those sisters were keeping everything going. So they're reflected in these characters, these teenage girls, I guess, in it. So it's incredibly rich. These Then they tell us so much about a social history of Dublin, about Joyce's own life, about complicated family relationships. It's amazing, really amazing.
It does sound incredible. Like we had Elena Ryan from Children's Books Ireland on the podcast a couple of weeks ago, and she was talking about this need to find entry points and to make reading and books, accessible and relevant, but also to make them really connect with
Mm,
younger readers. And it's in the kind of the way you're illustrating it there and kind of giving us a taste of kind of the sorts of material you've been looking through. Like, it kind of sounds like there's certain resonances with the kind of experience of the past year and a half dealing with
yeah.
loss, struggle, difficult experiences. So it might actually prove an interesting vehicle to enable young
Yeah,
people.
I had one lovely group of transition year students in for 1 week. Imagine, in the whole in the whole time. And what I realized was a number of things. So there's only six of them. They were in their pod. It was all masks, but they completely engaged with all this. And the best thing was I gave them a bag of costumes. So Edwardian costumes, of course, Bloomsday and all of that is so associated with dressing up and the hats and the silly clothes, whatever you're having yourself, and
Yeah.
it's such an excuse to be silly. But I realized these wonderful young people had no time to be silly or play, and life had become so serious. And here they were, in the Joyce Centre with a big black bin liner full of silly costumes, and they loved it. And the laughter and the giggles, and exactly what you're saying is their world had become extraordinarily serious and difficult and challenging, and everything was be afraid, and here they were being children, I guess, and being silly and laughing at each other and silly clothes, and yet they were thinking about
Mm.
Edwardian Dublin, and what people would have worn, and
But it's
all of that went along with it.
it's kind of culture as a vehicle to enable something else to happen and to enable them to have these moments. And that sounds like one of the more uplifting moments that I'd imagine the past year has given. And it's funny. Like I've spent a lot of time the last year and a half looking at how my dog runs around chasing after a tennis ball, and I've kind of felt kind of be more dog is a sentiment that I really could take forward, but it ties into that embracing the silly that you're talking about there, and it kind of you as an organization are in an interesting position that we've all had we're all totally aware of the reality of the last year and a half, but 2022 is actually a very significant year in the world of Joyce, and so you potentially have an incredible opportunity. Tell us about the anniversary and how it could be marked.
Well, yeah, it's both challenging and exciting because everything has been a little bit on pause, on hold. So planning has been difficult, but 2022 potentially is, as you say, so exciting. It's the 100th anniversary of the publication of Ulysses, this extraordinary book that we we celebrate around the world. So Joyce was very superstitious, and particularly about his birthday, which is the 2nd of February. So the actual date of publication is the 2nd of February, 2022. So the 100 years will be on the 2nd of February. And of course, it's the Shakespeare and Co. bookshop, and the amazing connections there, and support he received from Sylvia Beach in Paris, and that literary community that surrounded him, that enabled this to actually happen. So I guess sometimes I feel around now was the final proofs been written for Ulysses, and changes, and working with the poor printers who had to decipher this madness. And they were French, and trying to read some of this English that didn't make any sense, must have been hard around this time, August, September. But yeah, next year, I mean, there's so many people. I've got so many emails from students and universities and consulates around the world, that are looking to Dublin to say, we want to come and celebrate, particularly Bloomsday, but the whole year potentially has significant dates that we can celebrate, and engage people with. But particularly Bloomsday, I think people will really want to come to Dublin. Some of them have booked their tickets already. I guess things have been on hold, so they're even more eager now. Anyone who wanted to come in 2021 or 2020 is really excited now. And I think they really want to really participate fully in the book. They want to walk the streets, they want to visit the places, they want to engage with Dublin characters, with real people. That the feedback and the the kind of energy and momentum I'm getting from the last two Bloomsdays. I think it's just I think it could be really exciting, and I'm really hopeful that Dublin City Council and also places like the Tower and Sandy Cove, of course, which are sort of, Dún Laoghaire Down, but also Fáilte Ireland. I mean, I think it could be really exciting to kind of reimagine the city and really save maybe some of it. That I'm thinking particularly of the dead house on Usher's Island, and maybe it'll be a really great excuse to say, we need to look, and for example, as well, Barney Kiernan's pub that a whole chapter in Ulysses is set in, has been for sale for a number of years, and that could be really gorgeous too. And there's places around the city that I think maybe right now we could preserve them and keep them and celebrate them in loads of fun ways. Yeah, we're hoping to really look at some different aspects as well. I mean, we talked about children there. I'd love to really look at all the female characters and the women, not just Molly, who's so fantastic and does get her own chapter, so to kind of elevate her even more. But there's some other fabulous women. I'm always amazed at how many are working. They're working as secretaries or sales assistants, or they're teaching piano, or they're they're really interesting women, that are populating, of course, working the streets as well, but they're kind of interesting too.
They're important stories. I think seeing representation and seeing characters that come from a background like you, who look like you, who sound like you, these are things that I think we as citizens need to see presented to us. And an interesting question that just came to me while you were talking there, like you're talking about the opportunity that we have to save some of the important pieces of our city's architectural fabric, or I guess our history and our heritage. Having, at the start of this conversation, you mentioned the way in which the organization was founded. So do you feel like, is there a kind of an advocacy kind of element to your work in trying to preserve the city?
I, I, I kind of feel that the more I've had to tell the story of the building, the more my own awareness has grown of that it's not just about this man and his work and his legacy, but his legacy is not just how he inspires writers, which of course is wonderful, or poets or musicians, which I'm loving, and I'm loving being and privileged to be able to feel like I can support that even in a tiny way. But yes, absolutely, I think if and especially what's happened in the last 18 months, it's been really shocking to see a decline in the city. And I think if it can even do a tiny bit towards celebrating the city and making people look at it and love it, and feel its richness. I think that would be really important, but I also think it's a no-brainer in a way. It's all there, if we just open a few pages, it's popping out at us. It's like a love story to Dublin City. I often think,
Yeah,
uh,
and it's funny. One thing that I have, I'll admit to being quite kind of unaware of, but was really kind of curious coming into this. And you mentioned a moment ago that it was Shakespeare and Co. that did the first publication, whatever, 100 years ago next year. But I saw on your website, and I thought this was fascinating, that there is a family tree of the print editions of Ulysses that have existed over the time, or over the last 99 years. And I'd love to know a little bit more about how the importance of it as a body of work came about, like what its journey to being the
it
Ulysses.
is really interesting, and probably, I'd love to be an expert on publication history, but I think we did a really interesting play with Colin Murphy about the the New York uh, court case challenging the obscenity of Ulysses. So this was as late as 1933, and it was Random House who wanted to publish Ulysses, and they took the case. So it's the U.S., the United States versus one book called Ulysses, which is an amazing title for the court case. So the history of that is that two amazing women in their publication, The Little Review, had serialized little excerpts from Ulysses in 1921. So this 100 years ago, this year, and it had been deemed, completely obscene, absolutely horrendous, and Ulysses then got banned, and so from 1922 to 1933, it was, sneaked into the United States, and it was also banned in many countries around the world. It was so. In some ways, this was really bad in terms of for Joyce, particularly because he wasn't earning royalties. um, but really good in terms of it became this uh, forbidden fruit. It was, what is this book? It got celebrity status, and Joyce got celebrity status partly due to this notoriety. So in 1933, then this big massive case, he appeared. So that was December 1933, and I think by early January 34, he was on Time magazine. And, he was like super duper celebrity writer. And of course, once he got sales, the US market, of course, was so huge and profitable. So for the first time, really, Joyce was getting money, and that really changed his life and his lifestyle for the next last few years of his life. Um, so then I'm not sure. I mean, it's still, like I said earlier, like in Ireland, it was never actually officially banned, but it was deemed, obscene. People were embarrassed by it. His family in Ireland were embarrassed by it. Um, I'm not sure if the church had an opinion on it, or did they even bother? Did they just want to ignore it? I think we as a country had a complicated relationship with this. We didn't really know how to deal with this book, and then of course in later years copyright became a big issue. So Stephen Joyce, Joyce's only grandson, held everything with really tight reins. Sometimes I think he gets a really bad press, but I think he deserved some of it. And then part of me thinks he's like a parent who says, if no one can play nicely with the ball, no one's playing with the ball. No one is, if you all can't agree. And so maybe people were, creating editions of of Ulysses, or Joyce's work that he wasn't happy with, and there was legal cases, and it became all a bit difficult. New versions of his work or translations of his work, and so certainly from my angle, which was Joyce in performance, we began working on it pre copyright restrictions being lifted. So it was really strict what you could do and couldn't do. So I think his work wasn't generally performed, or there's an opera on now this weekend in the Gaiety, of the Dead, and so these are only in the last 10 years are these performances and readings and being very widely performed, and audiences can finally engage in it. So it has been a kind of weird 100 years.
It sounds like it's had very clear markers and milestones within it. So it's kind of it's happened in phases. And just kind of when you mention performance, you know, I know how I personally first met yourself was when yourself and Sinead Murphy were in the museum. Oh gosh, must be a number of years ago now.
Yeah.
You performed some of Joyce's ballads for us, and a big part of your own work, in addition to being the director of the James Joyce Centre, is actually showcasing Joyce's work in song.
Yeah, I mean it's part of that real passion to make Joyce's work accessible, like you talked about. So for so many audiences, music is a way in, a wonderful key, excuse the whatever, to get to engage, and so Joyce's work is just full of music. He was a really good singer himself. His father was a really good singer. His mother was a really good singer. There was music in the house, from from the get go, and he absolutely was like a musical magpie, engaging with. Traditional folk song to opera that was being performed in the opera houses around Dublin City, to music hall, to street vendors and street artists and ballad singers, to church music. His mother was very Catholic. She sang in lots of different churches around Dublin, but around the corner from you, we mentioned in Clarendon Street. Um, so he was exposed to all of that, and it's all in his books. Then his characters are all singing all the time, or they have an earworm of a lyric that's going around their head all day, or Leopold Bloom particularly gets mixed up all the time with lyrics. He kind of half sings it, or he gets half it right, like we all do. It's really fun to, and it's a great starting point to celebrate the characters and to give people a taste of all these places in the book. So the theatre, or the church, or the parlour, the sing song in the parlour that his aunts or whoever would have been, and invariably they're beautiful. He has such a good ear. These songs have gorgeous melody, or they've really fun lyrics, or really beautiful romantic lyrics. I mean, he just has such a good ear. So it always is really engaging for audiences. And of course, the reason we chose the music was a lot of the songs the character sings. There aren't Joyce's work itself. It's the Spotify playlist of the day. So he's grabbing music from, and I think in the little museum we focused on Dublin composers, actually, quite a few Dublin composers that Joyce would have, of course, been listening to, and he chose to have them, include them. So we thought that would be interesting. So the theme for that night was Dublin in song. So what was Dublin singing at that time in Joyce's Dublin? And the stories around the songs as well are so gorgeous, and the context why Joyce chose them, for a particular episode or a particular character, are all so interesting.
Hmm. And that, you know, it's the which of your children is your favorite child question. What is the what is the character or theme or episode or book or piece that you personally adore working on?
Oh, I think, well, yesterday I was performing The Little Boy Who Saw the Boxing Poster on Wicklow Street. And that's a really beautiful piece. There's something so sad and so gorgeous about him. I think, though, my favorite is Anne Olivia Plurabelle from Finnegan's Wake, which I know sounds a bit mental, but to me, and it took me a really long time to learn it. It was really, really hard. But once I got really, really deep inside it, um, and it's not that long, but it took so long to learn, it became just beautiful poetry. So this is the moment at the very end of Finnegan's Wake. So the last bit of writing of his last book. And it's Anna Livia Plurabelle, who's the River Liffey. And she has finished her journey like all good rivers. And now she's about to reach the sea, and she knows this is the end. This is everything has to go round again and be reborn or go up as a little cloud and fall as rain and come back. So again, I guess it's a little bit sad, but it's so beautiful. Just gorgeous poetry. This saying goodbye, this ending, really gorgeous. And to feel again Dublin, it's the river that we crisscross all day long, or that is so much part of it, or we ignore, or we that this is the energy of that. It's so
Yeah,
beautiful.
oh, it's such an important part. It's such an important part of the heart of our city. Like I drove past the convention centre down the Liffey yesterday for the first time, I would say, in almost 18 months. And there was a moment you were distinctly aware that it was an important place in growing up in the city.
Yeah, and I think all that you were asking at the beginning about, you know, celebrating the buildings or celebrating the places. I mean, the river is, I think, maybe lockdown has been really good to the river in a way. I've been passing it with kayakers out, and of course the guys jumping into it. But I think maybe we're beginning to relook at our river and our this incredible resource that it is,
Mm.
a little more. I mean, I guess in Joyce's time it was a heart of industry. I mean, it was so full of people working all day long, and how many boats are coming and going. It meant, freedom. It meant escape. It meant getting out of here.
Yeah.
Um,
And on that sentiment, Joyce himself, it's kind of widely known that, he lived abroad for quite a period of time. And, I know that in the center you have kind of a recreation of the study to kind of give an impression what his, I guess, environment would have been like. Like, what sort of insight do we get from being able to recreate scenes like that?
well, had a student group this year online, amazing group from all over the world. And one of them said, um, it was reading Ulysses. So some of them had read it a couple of times. I think they were cheating, going on a course. It was supposed to be for beginners, but anyway, they just wanted to share this, and they were in Australia and Canada, and one of them said, he reckoned Joyce just used to write little scraps, little ideas would come, and he'd gather up all these scraps. And he reckoned Ulysses was all the scraps of paper. And then he kind of found the the frame of the Greek myth, the Odyssey, Ulysses and his journey, and kind of placed all these fragments within this frame and kind of shoved them together. Some fit more better than others. And but I went back up to that little study. It's a bedroom, and I had kind of forgotten or hadn't looked closely enough every time I'd been up there. But there, and I think it was Monica Frawley, the designer, who had created this room. But it has lots of little scraps of paper placed really carefully into, a little hanging, almost like a folder type thing where little that you could record all your little fragments of paper. So that was really interesting, from the student saying that to thinking about how Joyce worked, which was chaotic. his nomadic life of the teenage Joyce moving 14 times around North Inner City Dublin continued his whole life. It was constant change, constant moving house, no stability, no matter which city he lived in, Trieste or Zurich or Paris. It was, I don't know, I honestly don't know how Nora, his wife, did it. But so his writing could be anywhere. He must have been able to just switch off the world and be in a cafe and have a little glass of something and either listen or go back to Dublin in his mind, or have a little thought and just and create these little notes and gather them up somehow. And of course, his eyesight was failing too. And later on, I love the stories of him. And I sometimes tell the children, small children, that he used to write in a big blue crayon, like really big, because he couldn't see, so he had to. um, and I'm looking at some of his we've copies in the Joyce Centre of just copies of original manuscripts that are in collections in Buffalo and Miami University and places like that. But yeah, amazing to see his corrections and crossing out and scrawls and little notes and pictures, and yeah, amazing. But yeah, I don't know how he worked. He was able to work, on a little suitcase or tiny space. He didn't need the beautiful desk and the beautiful view of the lake from his bay window or anything. This was not that type of writer.
He was quite inward and he did the work.
Mm.
Yeah, it sounds. I think as someone whose brain couldn't work like that, it's fascinating, but also, it. I love getting insight into the creative process and kind of getting a sense of what the behind the scenes reality may have looked like. And it's an incredible thing that you're enabling people to walk into this study to actually, well, get a sense of these moments and of what the experience would have been like. And I kind of like, I know, as is kind of so true to so much in a city like Dublin, partnerships are key. We're all to some degree working together to make everything that we're doing possible on a daily basis. But that kind of got me thinking about Joyce and his relationship with his contemporaries, but also with, official Ireland through our national institutions. And I wonder, do we know much about what those relationships were like?
um Again, I think they were part of that complicated relationship. He himself, uh, as a young man, he got lots of support from other writers like Yeats and Synge and Lady Gregory and AE, and I mean, he was really, despite his best intentions, he was part, even on the kind of periphery of this incredible literary revival. But he was a difficult, insecure, maybe stubborn young man who couldn't really admit to being part of it, or getting help from it, even though he'd beg them for money or whatever, and they tried their best. Um, so yeah, he was angry with establishment. He was very angry with the Catholic Church. He was cynical about the Gaelic revival, and he wanted to look towards Europe. He saw that as being more enriching, widening their minds, opening up to new ideas and politics and society and people. And he really he saw. I mean, he studied European language, and he loved European writers, and he'd learn Danish so he could read Ibsen and the original. That kind of person. um, so I think in a way, Dublin and Ireland was stifling him, his own family life was stifling him. He had to he talks about these nets that are on him in a portrait of the artist. He wants to just break out of this conservatism, this small mindedness. Um, but I think part of the legacy then after his death was people didn't really know how to embrace him back as an Irish writer and fully again, 1940s, 50s Ireland was still so conservative, and um, things that he wrote about the Catholic Church or about women, or it was. I don't know if they could be seen to be promoting that. So yeah, it's
But
but
sorry, apologies for
no, no, no.
no, it's for a writer who is, im- who is intimidating to a lot of readers. It's interesting to think that maybe this identity situation of, am I a dub, am I Irish, am I European, that his kind of complex relationship, as you're saying there, these things collectively may have kind of cumulatively had a role to play in kind of how we've come to embrace them. But like
Yeah, yeah, I think all of that.
Bloomsday must be doing.
And then on the other hand, so I think part of what copyright as well then in the last part of the 20th century, it kept Joyce in a kind of academic realm rather than in uh, a public realm or a popular culture realm that we didn't he wasn't everywhere. He wasn't being quoted all the time. He wasn't being performed all the time. So I think then Bloomsday is this, it's like the opposite to this academic realm. It's absolutely for everybody. Nobody needs to have read it. Doesn't matter. I think it's about something to do with drinking and going for a swim in the 40 foot, and it's great fun.
Food, food to me, it is food.
And food and indulgence and a kind of Belle Epoque, Edwardian fun and abandon, and it's really interesting, isn't it? And totally accessible and for everybody. So it is funny that these two can exist side by side.
Yeah, he's a fascinating character when you actually start to kind of unpack it. And I kind of I remember we spoke about this when you were in the lead up to Bloomsday and you were still very much in kind of question marks and planning mode. Like, what was the reality of making the most of Bloomsday over the last couple of years?
The reality,
Or how
the
did they
big,
go to make that
big
into a positive question as opposed to negative? Sorry.
yeah, no, no. I think the most amazing thing was it is truly a global celebration of Dublin. And I think that's what I learned. It is mad. It's that people in Melbourne and Toronto and Buenos Aires and Azerbaijan and are having a Bloomsday celebration, and I just think that's amazing. And I know the Department of Foreign Affairs have, and I've been lucky enough to tour with the Department of Foreign Affairs over a number of years. So I was part of their Bloomsday celebrations in amazing places like Shanghai or in Slovakia, or and but actually great fun, and it can be used as a way just to have a party, but to look at all aspects of Irish culture. So to me, that's really exciting in the role as director, because you're seeing this wonderful legacy then. So they can introduce through Joyce and this day, think about other Irish writers, of course, like Seamus Heaney and John McGahern, but also contemporary writers, and focus people's attention to new books of poetry or new artists. And so, you know, I sometimes used to laugh and say, "Oh, it's like St. Patrick's Day," you know. It's like, but actually, in a way, it's
Yeah.
like to use it as a great way of celebrating Irish culture, but a completely different form of Irish culture, um, that can celebrate, incredible new Irish arts practice, which is so exciting. Imagine being able to do that, all around the world. But the fun of sharing with the world as well was really interesting. That because everything was online and it was so hard to get that up and running, and to make sure there was events that were, as all of that entails. But then the audiences were so appreciative, and some people who just celebrate Bloomsday on their own, wherever they are, were suddenly allowed to be with us as this community. Really interesting. It does feel like a community now, that increases around Bloomsday, but there's so many reading groups around the world. Japan, you just think Copenhagen has about 3 reading groups for Finnegan's Wake or Ulysses, and you think, God, this is just mad. People email me about, oh, we want to set up and it not always affiliated with a university or an academic institution. These are just maybe people who love it, and there's one group in Toronto who just listen to the 1982 recording and drink pints and then have lunch. And so it lasts on every first Saturday in a month, in every month or something, but they're hardcore, but there's no chit chat. They don't do readings or anything. They just sit and listen to another little bit. Amazing.
That sounds entirely pleasant and charming. It sounds
Yeah.
wonderful. And then I guess kind of, you mentioned that you took on the role as the director of the James Joyce Centre about 18 months ago. So it was interesting placed time wise. But like when you think about the incredible legacy of Joyce, when you think about your hopes for the future of the city, your hopes for the future of the centre, what role do you hope Joyce plays in the future of the city in the next chapter?
Well, I think we've hit on so many of those things this evening that I think it allows us a really good excuse to think about our city and the culture of the city, and its history and its music and its its creativity. Um, so I think his body of work, which is just all about this this city, allows us a kind of entry point to think about all of those things, because we have this window to the world, which is extraordinary, and people, especially in 2022, will be looking at us. There's the Joyce Symposium will be held in Dublin, just around Bloomsday, and I call that the kind of Olympics of Joyce. So all the top academics and people, maybe using Joyce's writing as a springboard for their own writing, or that will all be focused on Dublin as well. So I think it's an incredible opportunity, to kind of celebrate the city in a really positive way, and hopefully out of that, little seeds of other things will come. And just what you talked about, partnerships as well, and that has been really lovely, a really good outcome of Zoom, that I think people have made phone calls and said hi, and how are you getting on, are you coping okay, and do you think we could do something, or it's that's been really lovely to just and make kind of friendships without
Yeah.
meaning too, that we're not all separate. It became kind of interesting to say, actually what you're doing is really interesting, and we could, we've got a tiny bit of funding and we could support that too, or I think his work might be a meeting place for all of that as well, partnerships and other cultural institutions to work together. Yeah, like if it can do a tiny bit of that, I'd be happy anyway.
No, it sounds like a wonderful hope, and it's kind of it's something I've picked up on in the last couple of months as well. I think, as you said, you know, I think everyone's guard is down, just kind of going, listen, this is where we are. This is the experience of the last year or two, and I think conversations have been very honest. And when you
Mm,
actually get into the meat of it, a lot of us have very similar objectives, and generally they do seem to orientate around the fact that we collectively care about the future of our city, and that we want to be playing our own small parts in, working with the wider collective to make something good for it.
yeah, yeah, and I think it's almost like a huge responsibility now, isn't it, to say, people will want different actually experiences. It doesn't have to be, the same. We maybe we can be more playful, like the kids with the the big bag. We
Yeah.
Maybe it will empower us to just try things, and maybe that it won't always be right, but it'll
Give it a go.
give it
It's
a go. And I know for next year, lots of people just want to do a lot of things that are fun, really fun for Bloomsday. They want, I don't know, cabarets and, messing, like a silly things. It doesn't have to be all very serious. I think they'll want to party, dance.
and we have all earned a good party at this stage. And I think, as you mentioned the word empowering there a moment ago, and kind of as a concluding thought, I'm sure this is a conversation and a question you're asked reasonably regularly. For those of us who have never started, let alone finished reading Ulysses, the one piece of advice, where do I begin?
um, Begin in chapter 4. uh, the beginning, or read Portrait of the Artist first, because the first few chapters are primarily about Stephen Dedalus, which is very much the James Joyce autobiographical character in a way, and we see him very closely. We see him from early childhood in the nursery, being sung to by his father, right up to the point where he wants to leave Ireland and get rid of those nets that I was of, family and fatherhood, or fatherland, and the church and state, or British whatever establishment as it was then. And then we meet him at the beginning of Ulysses, and he's come back from Paris, and he's a bit pretentious, and he drinks tea with no milk and stuff. He's notions coming back, and he's out in the tower in Sandy Cove, but he's quite a few notions, and he goes off on many streams of consciousness, and they're difficult. They're difficult reading. So if you haven't kind of learn to love him a little bit in Portrait of the Artist, he's a difficult enough character to this pretentious young man that we meet, but we understand him a bit more if you've read Portrait. But chapter 4 is, we go straight into the kind of more earthy, real, um, complicated character of Leopold Bloom, but we start his journey around Dublin in chapter 4, and he's much more accessible. My other top tip was always to just open it anywhere, kind of do the kind of pick a page and just read and see what happens and see where you are. Um, you know, find a moment. And almost like the fragments we were talking about, the little bits of paper, uh, just kind of see, ignore the lists. Oh, it took me years to embrace Joyce's lists. He loves a good list. And they used to drive me mad, so I'd have to skip them. So don't be afraid of skipping if you
Right.
find something a little bit difficult, or you have to go over it a couple of times. Just, it's okay. Give yourself the license to skip. And then, the next time you come around, you can go, oh, what's he saying here? What's a reading group? Actually, if you're is lovely, really lovely, go quite slowly and read a couple of pages and have a little chat about it. And I've loved being part of reading groups, and I've learned so much.
Mm.
Amazing, amazing. Just and you can pop in and miss a few weeks, and come back, and you'll still. It's so rich and so dense. I think that's the problem. There's so much in it. But
Yeah.
yeah, don't be afraid. Don't be afraid. It's funny.
Well, then playing into the sentiment that we all might need a little bit of fun and, I dare say, socialization. It sounds like something lovely for the coming year. But Darina, I see someone who wrote in just to say they love seeing how you thoroughly enjoy your subject, and just really,
Oh,
I think that totally personifies how I've felt throughout this conversation. It's been an absolute delight sitting here and chatting with you. So thank you so much.
great, and thank you. It's been really lovely. I think I said to you, if you got me around Bloomsday, I'd be a quivering mess, and I'd hate Joyce, and I'd hate Bloomsday. But I've had a little bit of distance, and I'm ready to. And actually, performing for the kids yesterday was so lovely. It's just, yeah, there's so much fun in it, and warmth, um, and real love. There's amazing relationships in Ulysses, so it's worth it to find um, those moments, and not take the dense language too seriously when you come across it.
And to not be afraid to skip the odd list.
Yeah, skip,
Uh,
skip.
skip the lists. Well, I'm firstly, I'm so heartened that live events, however kind of controlled they are starting and returning, and we're heading hopefully in the right direction. But Darina, thank you so much for being here. Thank you to everyone who has joined us and will listen back to this conversation. So our guest for this evening's 120 Dublin Stories, which is presented by Santa Rita and the Little Museum of Dublin, has been Darina Gallagher, the director of the James Joyce Centre. So good night, and thank you so much.
Thank you.